All right. So today's session on PolicyMap, I'm just really going to show you how to access the tool, and we're going to talk about some of the really cool data that's in PolicyMap, how you might want to use it, and then some hopefully very unique features that you're going to find within the tool that you can access. The first thing you'll notice is that there's a very specific URL that we created for the CLEVNET team. So basically what this is what we call as a site license. It allows Hillary and her team to manage and organize whoever has access to it. But this access is specialized to your group. So once you log in, you'll have basically what we call the complete site of PolicyMap. So we did launch a brand new version of PolicyMap, something we've been working on for about 2.5 years. So there are some really neat features about it, and then we've also given access to what we call the legacy version of PolicyMap because we're still finishing a few things that are still working on that are still pretty big to the tool. But almost about 80% of what we've finished in PolicyMap is done from the site itself. So the goal of the tool itself, as I sort of mentioned in the intro, was that it is to help visualize data. And again, the purpose is to be able to go into a community, look at that data across those given neighborhoods, and there's a wide variety of different data sets in here, and we're going to try to focus ourselves into maybe just a handful of ones that you would probably use specifically. But the maps itself are fully interactive, so you can click and drag the map around. You can zoom in and out using your mouse wheel. You can also use the little navigation bar on the right. Once you get to a given area, the next step is to really add data. And there's actually a really very unique way to add data to the tool itself, but that's actually using the bars in the very top. So the location bar works like a search bar like Google Maps. You can type in an address or a city or a county. In this case, let me just take us to a place here. These are neighborhoods. So we type in something like city like Parma. This allows us to go into the city. It'll draw the given boundary for that particular area. So you can search for zip codes, counties, cities. There's a wide variety of geographies you can search for. And if you're not familiar with the different geographies, there's a couple really unique ways to see it, which includes being able to clicking onto the map. And this will give you a really neat window into the different geographies that we use in PolicyMap. So this is actually showing you things like what we call block groups and tracks and zip codes and cities. So this point happens to sit within this block group, the track, the zip code, city, county, and such, and so forth. So we generally call these things predefined geographies, and all it means is that they exist within our universe. And as we add data, or as you search for things, you'll realize that these are really unique boundaries that you can utilize as well. Another really neat, easy way to get to boundaries is to just display the data itself. And that's the boundary menu on the top left. So this will give you a chance to display all the different boundaries that exist within our universe, and probably boundaries that you're familiar with when it comes to looking at communities and areas that you're working in. So a very simple one, of course, is zip codes. This allows you to add zip codes to the map. The boundaries are unique in that you have a little bit of customization to them. So if you don't need the labels and just have the mouse over, at least you'll have the zip code boundaries. Then of course you can also customize the boundaries, and this comes into play when you're overlaying multiple boundaries. So if you want to see how maybe zip codes sit within a county or counties sit within a metro, the ability to change the colors of the boundaries, or even the line types and widths and such. So the boundaries are an easy way just to visualize those places directly. You can also make your own boundaries as well, and this is still considered data for us within the tool. So that feature is what we call a custom region. So a custom region for us is basically a unique boundary that is outside of our predefined geographies, meaning that if you have maybe a unique boundary that's based off a radius from a library or a drawn road around a given area, then you can use that as a custom region. So there's 3 unique ways to make a custom boundary. The draw feature is just that. It's the ability to draw on top of the map. So the first way to draw is to click the point, and it's pretty simple. You're actually just clicking onto the map. You can still zoom in to get closer to the given area. But the point of this is that you're drawing along the street that you're looking to create a boundary for. I'm going make a really difficult one, of course. And the goal is to click onto the first point or a point, and it will close and contain the drawn custom region. So a drawn custom region is unique within PolicyMap. Once you click continue, you give a chance to give it a name. And for this, we'll call it whoops. So a drawn custom region is unique within the tool because it's a free boundary, which allows you to cross city lines, county lines, state lines, and so forth. When you need to get data for this very unique boundary that you created, that's when our tool will start using some really simple rules, things like a coverage rule. So in this case, if you are looking to download data for this particular boundary, and let's say you're looking for maybe something really small, like a census tract or even a zip code, what this will do is use a really simple 50% coverage rule, meaning that as long as 50% of the census tract, in this case, sits within our drawn custom region, it'll be used within aggregation. So in this example, all the tracts with the exception of this bottom one would not be added. That's just because there's no correct statistical way to divide a boundary up in the tool. But it also means that sometimes you need to make boundaries that are based off of other geographies, meaning that you wanted to group maybe some zip codes together to create a new coverage area or containment area, or even counties to make a new region. And that is what we call then the assemble custom region on the function. So what this initially does is use your current zoom level as a geography, which is in this case census tracts, but we can use the menu here to choose any of the boundaries that exist again within our universe. Zip codes, counties, and so forth. So we can stick with zip codes. We'll zoom out a little bit and say, and you're simply just selecting the map and it will highlight the areas that you contain as a zip code as your custom region. And then when you're done, you have the ability to give it a custom name as well. So a drawn custom region and assembled custom region, and the radius one is unique as well because it does allow you to do a couple of different things, which includes the ability to enter an address onto the map and then define the radius, and it'll zoom to the address and basically draw a radius around it. Or the other function is probably one of my more favorite features is define the radius. Let's say we want to get a 3-mile radius, and then from this we can just simply click onto the map and it will draw that simple 3-mile radius. And you can control this and adjust this and say this should have been 2 miles instead versus 3. So custom regions are really unique within the tool. Besides being able to give you the ability to quite visually display maybe the areas that you're working in, you also have the ability to, as I mentioned, get data for that custom region, as well as even customizing the boundaries a little bit. So you can change the colors, the ranges, you can download data, you can get a report for this particular area, and we'll come back to some of these in a moment as well. But then probably one of the most unique features and really helpful for a lot of our enterprise users is that you can share this boundary with other users as well as the enterprise itself. So meaning that you can take this boundary and say, I want to share my unique boundary that I drew with everyone on the CLEVNET tool. This allows you to share with everyone within just the tool itself, or you can select individuals still within the CLEVNET program, allowing you to share their boundaries with those individuals. And then shared regions appear in your menu up here. And then from this allows you to see a couple of boundaries that I created. Here's some test ones that Hillary created as well. So, so you can see differently. These are different ways to share because some will be individually shared with just myself, and then there will be a public share one in here as well. All right, I'll take a little break if there's any questions that you might have. I think everyone is currently muted, but if you're welcome, just unmute. And if you do have any questions about what you've seen, we're going to talk about data in a moment, but I just wanted to get some boundary stuff out of the way because it's really one of the neat features of the tool. All right, great. So the next step really is a lot of reasons why people are using the PolicyMap tool, and that's being able to add data to a given area. And that data is in these categories above the map. And a really neat thing about the tool itself is that the first subcategory in our tool is what we call point data sets. So point data sets are address level data, which exists as icons in the map, and each icon represents an address. So point data is address level data. And then the rest of the categories are what we call a data layer. So this is data that's aggregated to a geography. These make these colorful maps that you're probably familiar with within the tool. But I always want to point out those two types of data. So point data and data layers. And we'll come back to these two more importantly because they have quite a bit of customization to them. And that's probably one of the really neat features that you would actually use some of the data tools for. But the data themselves, we try to put it in a category that hopefully makes sense. And so I'll give us a really brief summary of some of these categories that you might use on a more common process, but there's definitely easier ways to get to data. Demographics probably will be one of the more common categories you would use. This is a really great resource to give you some really basic information about demographics, things like population, racial characteristics, age groups. So if you're looking for very specific age groups that you're trying to focus on within a given neighborhood, accessibility. So if you're trying to focus getting people to access to a library or access to resources, this gives you that idea. Foreign-born migration, and then language is probably one of the really unique data sets for our public library users. This, if you are doing bookmobiles, was one of the really unique features because this allowed you to see a map that says all language spoken at home. So let's look at this layer first. Obviously, the most common language is English. So as you can see, everything will be pretty much English. And it really depends on where you go. But if you really dig into this category a little bit further, language, if you exclude English, then the next most common language is Spanish. And you'll probably get a very similar map still with mainly Spanish in those areas. But if you remove Spanish as well, then you get the most common language after those two, and this gives you this quite a bit of a mosaic map color. But what it does give you is this really neat way to see concentrations of third most common languages. And granted, they might be a small percentage, maybe 5 to 10%, but it does give you a chance to capture a different type of neighborhood based on where you're trying to address those areas. So this is a really neat data set from the American Community Survey, which is the census, ACS. And this allows you to start understanding a little bit of some of these neighborhoods that you probably are familiar with in general, but then you have a little bit of information to better understand those areas. So languages spoken at home, excluding English and Spanish, is a really neat, very unique data set. And this should be updated fairly soon with a more recent update. Another way to look at demographics, of course, is you probably are more familiar with some basic stuff like total number of people that live someplace, and of course, racial characteristics. One of the challenges about racial characteristics when it comes to the census itself is that it doesn't want you to look at a comparison of races sometimes. It really just wants you to look at one individual race at a time, or even sometimes they're groupings of other races, which is really how the census generally works. But a lot of times people do want to start seeing how the racial characteristics look like across the given area. And so we created this really neat index, which is the predominant race index. And so with this map here, you can see that anything in the green are areas that are predominantly black. Anything that are in blue are areas that are predominantly white, and then red is Hispanic, and there might be some purple in there for Asian. And so this is a neat map again. Looking at the given neighborhoods, you again probably know some of the communities and better understand where areas that have more than 90% of that area is predominantly that race. But then what you start getting to see is these really neat mixing geographies that are, while predominant in one race, it's not the majority of that race. And so you start seeing these really neat like neighborhood lines a little bit that they mix up in together. There's some really general educational information in here. Households is probably a really important category that you would use. This initially talks about household types. So households with or without children, same-sex couples, grandparents with children, which is a really neat data set that we pulled from the census, mainly because we do a very unique study that talks about uh, early childhood learning and grandparents having to take care of kids is one of the unrecognized households sometimes in that research. So then you start getting these numbers that talk about grandparents that have children that live with them, but also grandparents that are caretakers for children as well. So some of this will just give you some really neat information and additional information about the types of families and maybe households that would be access to the library. And then, of course, family type talks about types of families itself. And if you're not familiar between households and families, the difference for the census is that a household can be one person. So that's why you get these average of one person households, whereas family type is more than one person, which includes children. I mean, some of these other categories are just generally interesting, maybe of use. Probably one of the biggest use for income and poverty indicators for your work is that if you're writing grant papers and you're looking for funding for certain programs, these poverty and income indicators are generally used within those variables. So household income is the most commonly used income measurement from that. So with this, you can look at either head of households, type of incomes, income brackets, and then age of income as well. So these are really unique if you're looking to try to identify older households within very specific income ranges. But then probably the two really important categories you would use as well is the quality of life. So these are, in the case of quality of life, these are mainly categories that talk about the overall health of a community. So in the case of point data sets, it does show things like, are you near a grocery store? Are you near a farmer's market? Brownfield and Superfund sites or chemical areas or areas that are designated by, I'll just pull it up, the EPA for coverage and such. But still within this, you can find generally other things, access to a library, museum, nonprofits, and parks. But the data layer part of quality of life includes crime data from the FBI crime report, but probably one of the more important data sets would be also access to the internet. This is a very unique one for public libraries because this allows you to see how people are accessing, or if they have access to the internet. And a lot of it comes down to education and access for those given communities. So another really unique way to better understand where your approach could be for those neighborhoods and how you would actually reach out to those neighborhoods as well. Because if you're doing an email campaign or even a mailing campaign, some of these people might not see it through a computer, through a website, but definitely through a phone or tablet. Transportation is very helpful because it also shows you vehicles per households. This is a really indicative layer that shows how people can and cannot get access to a library. And again, it plays into the bookmobile concept or accessibility to some of your patrons on the map. And then the last one I'll just talk about real quick, because I know there's a lot of different data sets that are in here, and there's a lot to dig into. But it's the health data sets, only because we are definitely very conscious about all the different types of health indicators that are out there right now. So with this, you'll be able to find information like hospital locations in general, but also more localized geographies like retail-based health care centers. So these are your corner stores like a Walgreens or CVS. So these will definitely come into play as the public vaccines would be implemented and pushed out. Community health centers, federal lookalike centers. So these are all really important areas for the neighborhoods. There are general statistics about health conditions, which include things like asthma, arthritis, depression, and diabetes, high cholesterol. So these are just general pieces of information that you can look at a given neighborhood and say, if you're trying to get more information about an older age population or a population that needs access to a variety of health information that's accessible from the library. This allows you to start visualizing that data really based on the communities and such. All right, so let me add a really simple layer and we'll talk a bit about data layers, and then I'll give you some ideas of how to use that data in your work a bit. And then if there's any questions about other data sets, I'm happy to answer it. But I'm going to add the really simple one, which is access to a computer, just to get a better sense of what this data layer looks like. So this is basically a really neat data set from the census. It's asking people in the survey, do you have a computer? And the reason why this is a really important question is because less and less people have a home computer. This greatly affects at-home learning, but it also greatly affects access to that. So some more public information that's on different types of websites. So to get more information about a data layer, you can also click onto the title. This little icon here will give you this much longer description from, in this case, the census. So as you can see in this example, a computer to the census is a desktop, but also a phone or tablet. So in this estimate, it's basically saying this household might not have access to any of that resource for a variety of different reasons. And initially, what you'll get is a really important legend. The legend is going to tell you a couple of things that are helpful to read the map. The first is on the very bottom, actually, which is telling you the geography, which is called a census tract. If you are not familiar with the census tract, let me just zoom in a little bit and I'll show you. So we'll zoom down a little bit. So if you're not familiar with block groups and tracts, I'll give you a really simple and quick explanation of this, and that way you understand a bit of context of boundaries, just in case. So the census that we do every 10 years, as well as every year now with the American Community Survey, or the ACS, the census, when they publishes data, it does not publish individual information. They group people together into census type geographies. And the smallest geography we use from the census is what is called a block group. In a block group from the last census is about 500 to 1,500 people. I'm sure that's going to be changed a little bit with the 2020 census, because that number is based on density of population. And the reason for that is because if we were to be in a more urban area, like closer to Cleveland, a block group is much smaller in its size, like this. Whereas if we go a little further out and look down to a more rural area, so a block group can be much larger in its size. And it all comes down to density of population, and that's the focus. And that allows the numbers to really represent the communities as a whole. But from there, is the aggregation or the building blocks of geographies for the census. So a grouping of block groups, or sometimes a block group, form a census tract. And a tract is about 1,500 to 5,000 people. And again, density of population comes into play. And then from there, tracts form things like a ZICTA, which is a zip code equivalent from the census. And then tracts also form county subdivisions. County subdivisions form counties and such. So this is what we call the benchmark of geographies. It's really helpful because it allows you to see the value of the place that you select, but also how it fits or sits within the larger geographies that it happens to sit in. So this particular block group, it's saying about 5%, a little 5% of the households don't have access to a computer at all, but it sits within the tract of 8%, it sits within the zip code of 12%, and then the city and the county of 10 and 12% in particular. So the benchmark is really helpful because it'll give you the value of those places without having to and then seeing a little more information about it. The mouse over allows you to see those values as well. And then what you keep seeing is that as you zoom in and out, you'll see the map redraws the boundaries based on your zoom level. So in this case, we zoomed out far enough that the map's going to try to show us census tracts. If you wanted to maintain that block group level map, you can lock the boundaries here, and it won't try to re-aggregate the map. Just be warned, it'll take a little longer to load the map because it's trying to render a lot of data, and that's the reason why we make the map navigate that way. But the legend is also a really important tool to be able to customize what you're seeing on the map itself. The first thing is the ranges itself. So in this case, it's saying anything in a dark purple is about 18% almost of the households that don't have a computer or not. And again, the mouse over kind of verifies that information. The legend also allows you to isolate those ranges. So if you just want to see these high ranges, it allows you to remove all the other data and just show just these places that you're looking at to try to identify the neighborhoods that you're looking at in those places. You can actually add a few ranges altogether. But more importantly, the legend also allows you to customize the data as a whole, meaning you can change the year itself. So this particular data set, we actually have an update to it coming, and more years to choose from. You can also change the variable. The variable is really important because the initial variable is, in this case, the percentage of households that don't have access to a computer. But this allows you to change it, and maybe you're looking for the number. So maybe the number is a little more important to you because you're trying to look at quantity in that process. So the map changes quite differently. So now it's saying the legend is anything in a purple are households of 252 households or more, whereas anything in the light purple are less than, and the zero is because we're near the airport. So the variable is really important in that process. And then the last way to customize the data is actually making your own cut points yourself. This really makes the maps much more focused for your readers. Because as you can see initially, this map is, the colors are great. It gives you a chance to see different neighborhoods and different concentrations of the number of households in this case that don't have internet. But the ability to make your own cut points is really important because it also allows you to focus the map and your readers to just a handful of neighborhoods that you want them to identify with. So a couple of really important things to change in here is you can change the ranges. So you maybe don't need 5 colors in this example. Maybe you need 2 or 3 in that process. And this allows you to show a really simple map that shows now just 3 colors. And so it's not as complex as our original ranges. But more importantly, you can also make your own cut points. And this histogram, that's what it's called, as you see here, basically it's trying to show you that majority of the data that of the geographies that actually have data is really on this over or less than 200 side. So while the max number of households in a block group is 2,178, the majority of the data itself is actually way on this side, probably below 200 in that value. So this allows us to bring the numbers down ourselves. Maybe we want to bring this number down to maybe 55 households or just 100 households, and then bring this up to maybe 250. So what this allows us to do then is find and address very specific neighborhoods that have more than 250 households in those neighborhoods that don't have access to a computer. So as we're getting a better understanding of where we want to reach the different neighborhoods, this ability to make our own cut points allows us to focus just to those neighborhoods. And then as we present this map, then this allows your readers to just look at these neighborhoods without having to look at the complexity of 5 different colors and the different ranges that are initially created. All right, so that's a data layer, giving you hopefully a good idea of how it can be used. This ability to customize the data is available for any layer that's on the map. So if we were to take this to income, to health indicators, to access to other resources, the legend is really important because it allows you to do some really unique customizations to that data. Okay, so let me show you one last type of data, and then from this, we're going to start going into other ways to look at data within the tool. And the other data, as I mentioned at the very beginning, is basically our point data sets. And with this, we're going to add library locations, since this is something you're familiar with. So in the case of point data sets, it is just that. It's just icons on the map. And each icon represents, in this case, a public library. And then this legend is going to have its own bit of customizations. The one thing I sort of skipped from the data layer legend is that there's a source link for all of our data. So that way, if you wanted to find out where this data comes from, click on the source link. It'll take you to what we call our data libraries page. And from this page, it'll be, it's a redirect. We'll fix that one for you. That will take you to a data libraries page, which has a list of all of our data providers that you can see where it comes from. Otherwise, each point, you can expand, have a little more information about the data, things that you probably are all familiar with in general in the case of public libraries. For us, one of the really neat things about point data sets is that we took a lot of this data. And so let me just we'll take this point of libraries off and we'll look at something simple like education data. So in the case of a public school, we can see there's a wide variety of data sets that we pull from public schools, including the grade that covers, the total number of students, student-teacher ratios, enrollment by class, demographics of the school, and so forth. So these pieces of data is available for every school, just like it was available for public libraries. And we wanted to give users the ability to take that data to basically create filters for the points that are being shown. Because what happens is when you first add a point data set, just like a data layer, you're getting all of the default settings for the data. And so a point data set in the legend allows you to customize the points, including things like filtering the points based on all the different data sets that are available from that set. So in this case, we can look at things like, let's say we just want to show middle schools on the map instead of all the schools. Map redraws, and now only middle schools are represented in this query. So the really neat thing about filters is that you can combine filters together. So if we wanted to say middle schools and high schools at the same time, this allows us to see both categories of schools. And then more importantly, you can continually add filters from other categories if you wanted to. So we can say of these schools that are middle school and high school, we want to find schools that have fewer than 250 students, or maybe even fewer than 429 students. So now the range is 429 and down, and they're middle schools and high schools. And so as you can see, the filters really gives you the ability to query the points based on a variety of different categories of that point data set. And then as always, you can also customize the points too, giving you a chance to change the size of the icon, the color of the icon, and the shapes itself. And this comes into play as you add multiple point data sets. So we were to go back to public libraries and add them to the map. You can see now you can have a neat representation of different types of points, showing you different icons and shapes and such. Okay, so let me show you the last process of the maps page, and then we're going to go into other ways to look at data, and we'll look at computer access one more time. And the last step of this is if you wanted to take this data and create a map, put it into your application or just a general presentation, you're going to use the icons in the bottom right. And the print icon is the one that allows you to export the map. So this gives you a really simple modal. Within this modal, you still have the ability to pan the map around. You can zoom in and out still. So you have all the navigations available from the map. And what you get from this window is exactly what you're going to print out. So what you see is what you get from this window. That means you can also edit the title and do a little bit of customization. So some places are much more vertical, allowing you to change the orientation, format, and so forth. And this will generate a file and it'll download directly onto your desktop. And then finally on the maps page, there's a very unique query function that allows you to isolate the area that you're working in. So this really comes into play if you are, again, maybe presenting a map and you're trying to show data just the area that you're in. So let's say we're going to zoom in just to Cleveland. What you then have from the search and from this link up here, as well as this link down here, is what we call a clip function. And what this does is basically isolate the data just to the area that you're working in. So now if you're presenting this map and you're looking through the area, as you pan through a place, you mouse over only the data available within, in this case, Cleveland is available or visual in that process. And then from this, you can also query this data into a table. And so that way, if you wanted to get a list of all the geographies that sit within the area that you search for up there, this creates this really unique sidebar. And so this sidebar allows you to visualize data on the map, but in a tabular format. And then as you can see, the two are interactive. So as you mouse over a track, in this case, it'll highlight the track within the tool. And the legend that's in the sidebar mimics the legend that's in the data itself, meaning that if we didn't want to show this data at tracks, maybe your readers are more comfortable looking at data at the zip code level. Changing zip code here will change the zip code in here, and then again, the mouse over mimics the two tools. And they work together, so that way you can go back and forth. So this function here is neat. It allows you to query data layers, but also allows you to query data points as well. So if we were to put schools back on the map, here's our schools again from our original query. We can change this now to say public schools instead of points on the side table, and now it just shows the points in the table. So the side chart or the side table allows you to, again, visualize the data in this very small containment area. And again, the goal of this is to allow you to present data just to a very specific place. But you can also download that data back into an Excel spreadsheet from the icons in the very top. So in this case, this is my spreadsheet of all the public schools that are just within my Cleveland city region I created. All right. So that's kind of the basics of the maps page and some of the main things you can do. Let me know if there are any questions you might have about that. Any ideas how you want to use it, I'm happy to dig into as well.
I have a question.
Sure.
I missed where you go to do the export.
Oh, sure. So there's two ways to export. If you want to export the map, just use the print icon on the bottom right. But if you wanted to export data, then you just want to make sure you have data on the map. I'll just add something really simple. And the clip and the tables are interactive. So if you click clip, this will show I'm sorry, if you click table, this will show the side table. And from this, you can download the data.
Okay.
There's a much more extensive download that's in the legacy version that we're finishing. But this is a really probably quick way to get to data without going into a much deeper download, which is in the legacy.
Great, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. All right, let me show you one last way of getting data within the tool, and that's probably the reports page. So we created a couple of really unique custom regions. So let's say we're going to take this one here. So from this custom region, there's a couple different ways to get to the report. You can actually just click on the report, which is this button in the very top right. This will open up our menu of all the different reports. And from this, you can go through the same path, but I just want to show you an easy way to get to it as well, which is from your custom boundaries that you create or shared. And so from this, we can say, I want to get a report of the community profile. And this is what we call a demographic report, really, but there's a housing report and a rental report. So let me just pull this up. So as you can see, this takes us to the report page that I took us to initially. From this, our custom regions already listed here, but we can always go back. And this allows us to type in a city, a zip code, county, again, still do a radius from your address or from a point of a library on the map, or in this case, a custom region. And what the report is an aggregation of data within that particular area. So this allows you to, instead of having to get pieces of data, this is probably a much more traditional way to look at data and collect data in your work, but this is going to wrap this around a much prettier way to look at data. So in this case, it's going to talk about population information. This is an aggregation of, in this example, of the 58 census tracts that were from the 2000 census and the 6 zip codes that we selected from the most recent ACS. So it's saying that in this area, the population was 187,000 in 2000, it was 175,000 in 2010, and 175 in the most recent ACS, and then the trend of change of population. Racial characteristics for the area, and again, it's an aggregation of that place with the change of change in demographics. Total number of households, age groups, income ranges for the households. Again, family types, always important way to understand neighborhoods. So this report initially was created for our nonprofit CDFI work. This gave our team a chance to get a really quick snapshot of the demographics of the neighborhoods that we're working in. As we get through the report, you'll notice that it also then starts talking about the community part of it as well. So things like type of housing that people live in. So are they in areas that primarily are large apartments and such? So the density of population really comes into play when you start looking at multiple units, large units and such. Vacancy data, jobs information, unemployment and such. So this is a really neat report. It's a really quick and simple way to get to a lot of very general demographic data, but then also some really neat data sets about the community itself. So all this is exportable. You can print this out into a PDF format as well. Yeah, so the reports are probably one of a neat way to get to data. And you can get to reports in a variety of different ways. Again, the easiest way is also just to click onto report itself. And then the last thing I'm just going to talk about is basically how to combine data together. So I've shown you how to combine point data sets, which allows you to show different types of address data sets, like a school location versus a library location. But the other way that you probably have had an interest for is the ability to add what we call our layer data or aggregate data. So what happens in the tool is that we go back to access to a computer. I just want to use this as a reference. If you wanted to see this data and let's say its relationship to the predominant race layer that we had, the map doesn't overlay those two things together. It flips the data, and so from this you can only see one or the other in that process. And so the single layer map, as the name implies, you can only look at one layer at a time. But if you wanted to overlay multiple layers, then that's where the multi-maps comes in. So this allows you to overlay multiple different types of data sets. So I'm going to put computer access. So understand that the single layer in PolicyMap, the goal is to try to give you a variety of different ranges, and those ranges represent the different colors and the different values for the places. But when we go to multi-maps, it's going to show you one color, and that one color is up to you to determine what range you want to present on the map. So the ranges allows you to either enter the numbers themselves in the fields. So think of the left number as greater than and the right number as less than, and you can see the histogram is telling you that majority of the households without computers is again on this really far side. So we can bring this number all the way back down to 12%, and we can even type in the numbers, say 10%. So what this is showing us in the map is that only places that have no more than 10% of the households don't have access to a computer. And you can bring this number up and vice versa. So if your goal is to try to identify households, more households that don't have access, then you can bring this number up and say at least 10% then. And that number is really, wow, all right, that's really high. Okay, so here we go. So these are places that, wow, at least 20% of the households don't have access to a computer, which includes smartphone, tablet, and so forth. And the way multi-maps works, as the name implies, is the ability to add multiple layers of data. So we can say of these data sets, let's find out how many of them are areas that are, we can use income as a denominator. So with this, we'll do income, household income, all households is the most commonly used income measurement. And so this layer is still sitting within our first range of at least 20% of the households. And this is at 100% of this particular range. So meaning that as we move this number, more or less places start matching our category that we match. So let's say we want to find places that have no more than, let's say 40,000 household income. So now in purple are only places that have at least 20% of the households don't have access to the internet, but its median household income is no more than 40,000 in that process. And then we can add another one here. So I apologize. The other search bar that I forgot to mention is the left search bar. Whereas the right search bar, its goal is to zoom the map to the place that you're going to work in. The left one is actually a data search, meaning that if you don't want to dig through a category to figure out what data is in a category, you can just try to type in some keywords up here, and that'll search our database based on that keyword. So let's look for, let's say, health insurance. So this is health insurance from the ACS. So this is the total number of people without health insurance in that process. So again, the third layer is still 100% of the range, but still sitting within the two ranges that we have, which is 20% of the people without a computer, but no more than 40% of the households of income of 40,000. And so again, in this case, maybe we're looking for places that have a high number of people that don't have health insurance. And so now what we get are places that meet all three criteria of, again, at least 20% of the households don't have access to a computer, at least 10% of the households of the persons don't have health insurance, and then no more than 40,000 median household income in those places. So this query is sometimes called an AND function because it's the intersection of these three particular layers, and it's using a geography to meet the intersection of those places. And the goal of this function really is very powerful, as you can see, because it allows you to just identify those places that you're looking to meet very specific criteria. And that criteria can be anything that you want to use within PolicyMap. It's language spoken at home, it's income, it's predominant race, it's health indicators. So all those things you can interchange and start really creating very unique analytics in this case to try to find places that meet your criteria. And you can have up to 5 data layers in this query, but I'm going to stop at 3 just for now. And so the AND function, the goal is to just show you those places that you want to looking to address. But another really unique way to look at this type of data is what we call an OR function, which is the overlap of data. And so you can see in the very top here, the legend has an AND, which is the intersect of data, and then OR is the overlap. And what this allows you to do is, while the AND function again is showing you just the places that you're looking to work in based on very specific criteria, the OR function then allows you to see a little bit of that overlap, meaning that there are some places that just meet our limited access to a computer. There are some places that just meet our income. There are some places that just meet our health insurance. And we still have the ability to see the places that meet all 3 criteria, but then you start seeing these really unique neighborhoods and understand that maybe this particular neighborhood here, these Newburgh Heights and Cuyahoga Heights, they are areas that actually meet the low income threshold but don't meet our health insurance threshold or our computer access thresholds, or these other ones that meet a combination of the other 2 indicators. So the OR function is just as powerful as the intersect because the intersect, again, is trying to identify just those places, but the OR in this case allows you to see this really unique map that shows your entire neighborhood, but then seeing how the surrounding neighborhood itself from the places that meet all 3 criteria match other criteria much more specifically in that process. All right, so those are probably the 2 really unique ways to use the mapping tool. Again, the single layer, it's very powerful because it allows you to take one layer and make really unique ranges. I'm just going to make custom ranges, control your values, present the data that you're trying to capture your audience with from a single layer. And the goal of this is to really make a series of maps sometimes that shows kind of a sequence of data representing the neighborhoods that you're working in and you're trying to present and understand. Whereas the multi-maps allows you to see then where you combine multiple layers together and start better understanding the surrounding communities and such. So this type of tool is a really neat way to get a better understanding of the neighborhoods and maybe the access of those neighborhoods based on different types of categories. Computer access, income, language spoken at home, health indicators, and so forth.